Today we're going to be learning Taanit Daf Yudaled. We're going to start from, we'll do a quick review of what we did from the second half of Amud Bet of yesterday's daf. So we saw that Rav Yehuda said, we had this issue that he said, where there's a whole discussion, really, let's just say it much simpler. Where does an individual add in a Taanit Tzibor on a public fast when they accept upon themselves a public fast? When do they say their Anenu prayer? Do they say it as its own special blessing or in Shomei Tefillah? So first they thought its own blessing. Then they said, no. Two of the rabbis said, no, in Shomei Tefillah, to which the Gemara questioned. But wait, it says there's no difference between Yachid and a Tzibor, except that the Yachid does 18 blessings and the Tzibor does 19. First, the Gemara assumed it doesn't really mean Tzibor. It must mean an individual doing the Tzibor prayer, because the Tzibor normally davens 24 blessings on a fast day, which we're going to talk about more today. Then we said, no, but that's not true, because really we can say it means an individual versus a community, and the community really davens 18 and 19 on this fast day. Why 19? Because we're going to say that the 24 was really only in the last set and not the middle set. And that's what we're on. We actually had a different answer before that, then they got off, but we're going to stick with we're toward the end of the daf. The ibait ema, one could alternatively say be'emtsiata nami lo matzle kafdalet. Okay, in the middle ones, we're going to assume they didn't daven 24 blessings either, not in the first set, not in the second set of fast days. In which case, we're going to say the second possible answer given, Tzibor really means Tzibor and not individual, and then we're back with the individual really only has 18 blessings and puts it in Shomei Tefillah, and that's great. The problem is the Gemara says velo, is that not true? V'hatanya, doesn't it say in a Braita? Ein ben gimel shniyot l'sheva achronot. I'm 3 lines from the bottom of your Gimel Amud Bet now. There's no difference between the second third, the second group of 3, and the last 7, except shebe'elu matchiim v'noalim et hachanuyot. And the last ones, they do this matchiim, which we'll talk about what that is later, and noalim et hachanuyot, and they close the stores, which sounds like which means that if we know you do 24 blessings in the last set, they must be the same as the second set. And if you want to say Taanit Shiur, like they suggested yesterday, maybe they said Ein Bein, but there's really more. Number 1, Ein Bein Katani. It says Ein Bein. And the Tizbara, do you really think that Ein Bein Dafka? So then they said, wait a minute. Sorry, I shouldn't say first of all. They said, but doesn't it say Ein Bein? There's no difference except for this, which really seems like there is nothing extra left over that they didn't mention, which would leave us with, they say 24 in both, in which case that raises a question against our answer. To which the Gemara suggests, B'tizbara, you really think Ein Bein Dafka? It really means this is the only difference, V'hashier Teva, but we know there's another difference between them that isn't mentioned here, because there's this Teva they would bring out into the middle of the city, and they would pray there. So they say, that's not a question. That's not really something that's left over. Because mili did sina katani, mili did parhesya lo katani. You can't say that it didn't mention it when it said Ein Bein this to that, other than that, and leftover teva, which would then mean and leftover blessings as well, right? These 24, which is another difference between them, which is what we were trying to prove, that again, Tzibor really means the middle set of fast days and, right, the prayer on the middle set of fast days, and not an individual, in which case they say, no, you can't say that Teva is a Shiur, because what they were referring to this, there's no difference between this and that. We're only referring to Milei de Tzina, only things that are done privately. Milei de Parhesya lo Ktani, privately they mean here in the shul, rather than in the middle of the street. Wasn't relating to those elements. So therefore, you can't say that that was left off, in which case you can't say that also the prayers were left off, the issue of how many blessings in Shmon Esrei. So you can also infer this from the Mishnah, that there really is no other difference, because it says, in what way are these more than the previous ones? Ella, they're only different in this way. It's another way of saying amen. They also say, what is the only difference? This is it, which sounds like there's really no other difference. in which case we're going to assume there's 24 blessings also in the middle, in which case you can't say that the 19 was referring to the prayers on the middle days, which means it can't be referring to the tzibur in the middle days. Remember, the first answer it was referring to the first days. Now they say, maybe when it said ma elu yiterot, just right, in what way are these different? And then it said only this way. So you might say ma elu hachanami, if you want to say also here, Tana Bashir, meant not only in this way, mainly in this way, but yes, there's other ways as well. But it says it in a language that seems to indicate just those and no others. And then they say, wait a minute. The tizbera, ma elu tafkahu, but wait, you want to say ma elu means these are the only ways they're different, but we already know. We already said this at the beginning of the daf. Vaha shiur la teva. They left out the teva. To which the Gemara says, no. Again, I mishum teva lav shiur. That's not considered something left out. Why? Mishum de kachashiv la beidach pirka. Because that thing of the teva is mentioned in the next chapter. Because of that, it's clear when it lists in the next chapter, these are the things we do on the third set. It's clear that it's only done in the third set and not before that. So therefore, they didn't need to mention it here. So it didn't leave it out because it was extra. They just didn't mention it because it's going to be mentioned later. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. Right now, what we want to try to say is, it didn't leave it out here, but it really did leave it out here. It's mentioned there. And that's why teva is out of the list. But otherwise, it really means there's really no other differences, which leaves us back with the question, how could we say that it's talking about the middle ones? And the middle ones had 24 blessings and not 19. To which we say, wait a minute. If already you're going to say, whatever it said in the next later on, it meant those are only for the last set of 7 fast days and not for the middle set of 3. Well, then, obviously, then, then we're going to say the 24 blessings that we say are only listed in the Mishnah by the last set. So then we're going to assume, just like we said, the teva is clearly only for the last set, the 24 is now clearly for the last set only, which means that we're back to answering our question. You could potentially say that the 19 blessings are really for the tzibur, not for an individual praying for Taanit tzibur, which leaves the individual doesn't add any blessings. They always do 18. They added in Shomei Tefillah in that prayer, and the community for the first set and the second set are always doing 19. And then that basically resolved our question. But that was only to answer the question against those who said Shomei Tefillah. But in the end, we still have these two opinions. Some say they say their own blessing, the individual, and some say you say it in Shomei Tefillah. So the Gemara says, "My havela." So what's the answer? To which the Gemara answer, we have 2 answers, a very confusing answer. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Sasratai, v'chein Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar Rav. Okay, 2 different people said it. Bein go'el l'rofei. They actually say their own blessing. That would have been fine had we stopped here. But the Gemara continues and says, V'Rav Ashi Amar Mishmei de Rabbi Yanai, Berei de Rabbi Yishmael b'Shomei Tefillah. He says, oh no, we say it in Shomei Tefillah. And because Rav Ashi was at the end of the Amoraitic time period, we often hold like him. And in fact, the Gemara says, Hilcheta b'Shomei Tefillah. We're going to have this exact structure later in the daf, where the Gemara is going to have it back and forth and then say, well, what's the answer? And they're going to bring 2 different answers. And then the Gemara is going to pass them which one we hold up. Tanichad. Now we're going to have a series of 3 braytot that contradict each other. Ubarot uminikot mitanot barishonot ve'em mitanot ba'achronot. Pregnant women and nursing women do not fast on the first ones, on the last ones, but they do fast on the first ones. Next brayta, Tani idach, mitanot ba'achronot ve'em mitanot barishonot. They fast in the last ones, they don't fast in the first ones. The exact opposite. And the third brayta says, Tanya idach, mitanot lo barishonot ve'lo ba'achronot. This is one of those signs, right? That says go this way, and they point in both directions, totally confusing you. So it says they don't do the first or the last. They don't do the first, they do the last. They don't do the last, they do the first. Super confusing. So Amar Rav Ashi nikot emtziyata biyadach. Go with the middle one, which means they need to fast in the middle fast And what's the reason for this? Very logical. The first fast is not serious enough yet. We don't have enough of an issue to make all these women fast, right? Because they're pregnant and nursing, it's more dangerous. However, when it gets more serious, they need to fast. But we don't want them doing the final set of fasts. Remember, there's 3 sets. So we don't want them to do the final set of fasts because they're much more severe. They start at night. It's a much longer fast. So therefore, we let them off the hook on that one. So that's why they do the middle one. And he continues to say, Dimitartsun Kulu. You can actually explain every single Braita to fit in with that. So the last one is the easiest, right? Which was Lo Barishonot, Lo Ba'achronot, but the middle set. Now the other 2 are going to be relative. Barishonot, they fast, but not the achronot. So what is that? Comparing set 2 and 3. The earlier ones, yes. The later ones, no. And when it says not, right, then it says the first and not the last, that's going to be not the first set, but the second set. Now the Gemara wants to go back to the Mishnah. Ma elu yiterot ala rishonot, right? In what way are these more severe than the earlier ones? Ela shebe elu matri'im v'noalim et hachanuyot. In this set of fasts, we do matri'in, which we're going to see what that means. We call out somehow, like a tru'ah, like a shofar blast, although we'll see what that means. V'noalim et hachanuyot, and they close the stores. B'may matri'in, in what way? Rav Yehuda amar b'shofarot. Rav Yehuda b'reit Rav Shmuel bar Shila mishmei Rav amar ba'anenu. One says with the shofar, one says with this prayer of anenu, which is a call out to God saying, please answer our prayers. It's probably like the anenu that we have in our prayer. In Slicha, we say them, anenu Hashem anenu, anenu lakenu anenu, anenu boreinu anenu. It's a call to God in many different terms saying, please answer our prayers. So now, we have this machloket. Is matri'in shofar blast, or is it a prayer and calling out to God, like crying out to God? In fact, we say often that a shofar blast is a cry to God. Kasal kadatach, when they heard about this machloket, they thought, and usually when we have they thought, we're going to change what they thought later, that they made a mistake. Manda amar ba'anenu lo amar b'shofarot, umanda amar b'shofarot lo amar ba'anenu. It's either or. But Hatanya, it says in a Braita, ein pochatim mishevet taniyot ala tzibur shebahem yud chet hatraot. You do no less than 7 fasts in this third set, 7 fasts with 18 shofar blasts. Why 18? Because there's 6 extra blessings. That was the difference between 24 and 18. 6 extra blessings in the Shmona Esrei. And each time you blow, a set of 3. Tkiya, trua, tkiya. So you end up with, right, Shebahen Yud Chet Hatraot, 6 times 3 is 18. V'siman ledavar yiricho. And how do you remember this? Each time you say the blessing, you do a tru'ah, which is 18 hatraot. Now, it still could be calling out 18 cries or 18 shofar blasts. However, it says the way you remember this is Yericho. Now, Yericho, Jericho, shofarot have it. The whole ceremony in Jericho, when the Battle of Jericho in the time of Yoshua, was shofar blasts. So now they say, Utiyuv telamanda amar ba'anenu. And this would be a contradiction to the person who held anenu and not shofar blasts. Here it seems very clear. To which they answer, okay, so we must have misunderstood. When it comes to the shofar, everyone agrees shofar is hatra, that for sure. The question is only, Marsa ba'anenu, kipligi ba'anenu. Their machloket is, does it also mean calls out to God, in addition to shofar blasts? Mar savar kare lahatra'a, umar savar lo kare lahatra'a. So the one who says it's anenu means shofar and calling out and crying anenu is part of hatra'ot. The other opinion says, no, just shofar. So now they say, right, Lamanda Amar ba'anenu kol shekem b'shofarot. So the one who says anenu says, and all the more so, obviously, also shofar blasts. And Lamanda Amar shofarot, aval ba'anenu lo. They say just with shofarot, not with anenu. But now the Gemara says, wait a minute. The Hatanya, that doesn't make sense either. Ushar kol minei puraniyot mitragsho kigon. If you have all sorts of other calamities that befall you, not rain calamities, but other calamities such as chikuch, which seem to be some sort of boils and scabs from boils, chagav, which are locusts, zvuv, flies, tzir'ah, what do you call them? Hornets, right? Hornets, sorry. V'yitushim, mosquitoes. V'shiloach nechashim va'akrabim, snakes and scorpions. Lo hayu matri'in ela tzoakim. They wouldn't be matri'in, which is the root that we're trying to figure out what it means. Ela tzoakim, they would scream out. Now, what do you see here? Tru'ah is clearly not screaming out, right? Because it's saying, don't do tru'ah, do tza'akot. So, tza'aka bepeh, hatra'ah b'shofarot. Tza'aka is with your mouth. It must be hatra'ah. This root of tru'ah must be some other way. So the Gemara answers, don't worry about that, because this whole issue is tru'ah. According to this Braita, tru'ah is clearly not bepeh with your mouth. But that whole issue is Tanai. It's a debate between Tanaim. Titania, here's a different source which seems clear that tru'ot are not shofar blasts, but calling out with your mouth. So we're going to see that it's obviously a Tanaitic debate about whether the word, it's all definitions of words. Is the word tru'ah, does it include with your mouth or does it not? So this source clearly thinks it is, because this source can't be shofar. We'll see in a minute. Titania, it says in the Braita, Al elu matri'im b'Shabbat. These things you call out, you scream out, right? You make like an alarming noise on Shabbat, even though it's Shabbat. Al ir shekifu agayis, if you're attacked, besieged by an enemy fleet. O nahal, or there's a huge flood, okay, and the water's overflowing everywhere. Or if you're in a boat and it's going under, or it's drowning. Rabbi Yossi omer le'ezra, aber lo le'tza'aka. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you can't do tru'ah, screaming. You can call for help, right? What are we calling for? We're screaming about. You can call for help, but you can't call like a scream out to God, okay? Now, why is that? Because it's Shabbat, and it's not appropriate to scream out to God on Shabbat. But this is a bit of a question, what exactly the issue here is. Rashi says, V'lo le'tza'aka tefillah, she'ein anu b'tuchim kol kach she'to'il tfilatenu letza'ok aleihem b'Shabbat. We're not sure it's really going to be effective, and therefore you can't do it on Shabbat, because it's like a problem on Shabbat to start screaming to God. In fact, we don't have, if you notice, our prayers don't have a lot of requests on Shabbat. It's not the appropriate time to call out to God for help. So therefore, they say, we can't do that. But what do you see here? You see that tru'ah means calling out with your mouth. So now they say, how do you know it means with your mouth? Of course, you can't do a shofar on Shabbat. That for sure wouldn't be allowed. So what do you see here? According to Tanakam, anyway, you could call out, and they use the word tru'ah, and they mean with your mouth. So there you see that one Tanaitic source didn't think tru'ah meant with your mouth, but this Tanaitic source does, and therefore it doesn't question what we established before. That again, the person who says bepeh means shofar and with your mouth, and screaming out to God. There was a case in the time of Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, that's the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, where there was some calamity. He said we're going to have, right, he instituted over time the first set of 3, then the second set of 3, that's 6, then the last set of 7, 13. He gets up to 13, their prayers don't get answered. He thought to institute more fast days. He says, listen, they say, that's too much for the people. They can't handle more than 13 fasts. How many fasts can you have a year? Rabbi Ami was acting of his own accord. And one way of understanding is, and we're going to see in a minute, that Rabbi Yochanan didn't agree with him. And the point is, he made up his own answer, and he didn't go with the mainstream opinion or Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. That's one way. Another interpretation, some people say, is he had trouble fasting, and it was a personal thing. He said, listen, this is too much. I can't handle another fast day. Okay, so don't do this to me. Either which way, we're going to now see that Rabbi Yochanan, Chiya bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan said, Lo shanu ela ligshamim. This limit of 13 is only when you're having an issue with the rains. We'll see why in a minute. But if it's any other calamity, you keep going till God answers. Tanya Namiach, here's a Braita to support this. Kshamru shalosh, ukshamru sheva, lo amru ela ligshamim. When we said 7, and we said the 3, and we said the 7, we only said that for rain, but when it comes to other calamities, you keep going until you get answered. That's exactly what we said. To which case, that's what Rabbi Yochanan said, to which case the Gemara says, so here's a good Taanitic source against Rabbi Ami. So they say, no, don't worry. It's not really a question for Rabbi Ami, because Amar Lacha Rabbi Ami, Tanaihi, he can say this whole issue is a Taanitic debate. Tanya, as it says in a Braita, Ein gozrin yoter mi-13 taniyot al hatzibur, lefi she'em matrichin et hatzibur yoter midai. So he says, right, this Braita, he says, I go with this Braita that says any more than 13 is too much of a difficulty for the community. This is Divrei Rebbe. That's Rebbe's opinion in the Braita. Rashba gomer lo min Hashem uzeh. That's really not the reason, and it's not true. The 13 is limited specifically when it's a rain issue. And here comes our explanation. By the time you get, based on all the dates of all the fast days, by the time you get to the 7 fast days of this third set, or the 13 altogether, you're basically at the beginning of Shvat. Now, at the beginning of Shvat, you've missed your chances for the first rains. You need the first rains to happen before that. If they don't happen by then any rain that's going to come now is not really going to help. It's kind of too late. So therefore, they stop the fast days because it's not really going to help anyway. You're basically doomed for this season, right? Your whole season is messed up. But when it's some other calamity, then theoretically, it's not time related, and therefore you would continue fasting. The people of Nineveh asked Rebbe the following question: Kigon Anan, what about us? Okay, this is a whole different sugya. This is about when you need rain. Okay, connects more with the beginning of the Masechet and this sugya in Bava Metzia, which talks about when we ask for rain. We need rain in the summer months. Okay, in the Koran, there's a footnote that basically says this can't really be Nineveh because Nineveh was on the Tigris, and it's the same kind of season. It doesn't really make sense that they would have opposite seasons as the norm, which is they needed rain in the summer. Okay, and therefore they claim, based on other texts, it might be B'nai Neve, which is a certain area. It's not a particular area. It's saying people living in this particular type of land. Okay, and that it wasn't necessarily Nineveh specifically, but either which way, these are people who needed rain a different time than everyone else. This goes back to, it sounds like what we were talking about in yesterday's stuff that we started with today. When you need something on an individual level, now here it's not exactly individual because it's a whole area, whether it was a city or whether it was a whole region, but do they pray? So we'll keep reading in a minute. Are they like individuals because they're against the norm of what it is in Israel? And therefore, b'shomei tefillah, and they add their prayer only in shomei tefillah. Now, most people think that this is talking about the prayer for rain. B'tein talu matar levracha. Do they add it when they need it in the summer? Do they add it in the bracha of shomei tefillah? O kirabim deminanu beberchat hashanim. Or do they go like the majority and they do it in other words, are they viewed as a tzibur, as a community, their own community, and then they can add it in the blessing where we always have for rain, where we normally say v'tein talu matar, in the blessing about sustenance. So shalach lehu, he answered him. Some people say, by the way, that they're talking about when the institute fasts, okay, and the prayer of Anenu on the fast, when they fast for this lack of rain, and that maybe it does connect a little more directly with what we're talking about, because otherwise it really is a little bit out of place here. So the answer they get is shalach lehu ki yechidim demitu b'shomei tefillah. They're like individuals, and they say it in shomei tefillah. It's a big question that was asked when Jews settled in Brazil and other places where the weather is the exact opposite, right? Does it go by Israel, or do they go by what they actually need? And if they do go by what they actually need, do they add it in the blessing, the regular blessing, or do they put it in shomei tefillah because they're more treated like individuals because they're going against the main, right? The mainstream, the majority of Jews, whether it's specifically Israel-centered or even just maybe where the majority of Jews are at. The issue here, obviously, is they're praying for something that's not actually good for other people. For other people, like in Israel, it's actually bad to have rain in the summer months. So because of that, it's almost like they're praying against what other people need. So it also makes things complicated. But now the Gemara brings, so it seems like they just do it as individuals, even though they're a whole community, and they put it in Shomei Tefillah. Meitive, but the Gemara brings a contradictory source. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ematai, when is this? Bizman shashanim ketiknam v'Yisrael shuyin al admatan. This is when the years are normal and the Jews are living in their land. But now, after the destruction, goes by, everybody, it's all individualized. There's no more centralization in Eretz Israel and Israel. Everybody goes by what their needs are. So, Amar Le, the response to this question is, because remember, this is a question the Bnei Nineveh asked Rebbe. Rebbe is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He's a Tana also. So other Rabbi Yehuda is disagreeing with him. So they say, Amar Le, Rebbe, you're bringing a Tanaitic source to question Rebbe. Rebbe Tanahu, Pali. Remember the rules. The rules are always, if you're an Amora, you can't say something against a Tana unless you have some good explanation. But if you're a Tana, you can argue with another Tana. Rebbe's got his opinion. Rabbi Yehuda has his opinion, and they disagree about it. To which the Gemara asks, I told you we get back to this kind of structure. My Havi Allah. So really, what do they do? And again, we're going to have Rav Nachman Amar B'Berkat Hashanim, Rav Sheshan Amar B'Shomei Tefillah. Again, we have this split. One tells you one thing, one tells you the other. Leaves us wondering what's really the answer. The Hilchata, the Gemara says, the halacha is B'Shomei Tefillah. They say it in their own individual prayer. They don't say B'Tein Tal Matal. Livracha, in, right? God should bring the rain and the dew for blessing in a time when the rest of the world doesn't need rain. Okay. The only difference we do have, obviously, is that on December 4th and 5th, outside of Israel, they start asking for rain later, but they're not asking, it still overlaps the time that they're asking for rain in Israel. Right? And that's because in Babylonia, they had less need for rain, but they don't ask it in a time when in Israel, they actually don't need rain. Next part of the Mishnah. B'sheni matin im chashecha. These are the stores. The stores are closed, but on Mondays, they open the doors a little bit before the end of the day, just a little bit. Ub'chamishi kol hayom, and on Chamishi, all day. In fact, the words all day don't appear in the Mishnah. Mipnei kvod Shabbat. Because of respect for Shabbat, people go shopping for Shabbat on Thursday. Ibailu. Now they want to understand, wait a minute, there's something very unclear here. The verb of opening the stores is matin, right? Open them a little bit. And it only appears once here by Mondays. Doesn't appear by Thursdays. So the question is, when it says b'chamishi kol hayom b'pnei kvod Shabbat, it's not clear. Does it mean you open them all the way, or does it mean you open them just a little bit, but you do it all day? So that's the Gemara's question. The question was asked, Hechi katane. How is this taught? B'sheni matinim chashecha u'b'chamishi kol hayom b'pnei kvod Shabbat. Is it on Mondays you open it a little before the end of the day, and on Thursdays you open it a little all day long? Oh, Dilma, where do we say b'sheni matinu b'chamishi potchim kol hayom kula? On Mondays we open it just a little, but on Thursdays we open it all day long fully. Tashma, let's learn it from here. To Tanya, it says in another Braita, b'sheni matin ad ha'erev. Ubachamishi potchim kol hayom kulo mipnei kvod Shabbat. There it has a new verb, potchim rather than matin, which seems to indicate you can really leave the door fully open. Hayu lo shnei p'tachim, but if you had two entrances, potech echad v'noel echad, one you would keep locked and one you would keep open. Hayalo itztiba keneged pitcho, if you had a platform near your entranceway, then potech kedarko ve'eno choshesh. Even on a Monday, you'd be able to leave your door fully open because the platform blocks people's view. The whole idea is that we're worried. People will see the food and want to eat. This way, if it's blocked, then they won't really see the food and then it will be okay. Avru elu v'lo na'anu. So now what happens? This third set of fast days passes and you still don't have an answer. You still don't get answered by God. Still no rain. Mima'atim b'masal v'matan u'v'vinyan u'v'nitiyah. You slow down your business, your building, and your planting. Okay, we want to basically move you into a type of avelut, okay, of mourning. Tana. So now there's a Braita that says, Bibinyan, what kind of binyan can you not do? Binyan shel simcha, only a binyan that brings happiness, not like a construction project or something, but something specifically that brings happiness, right? I know whenever I think about doing construction, it's not a binyan of happiness. I mean, maybe in the end it will make me happy, but it's usually pretty miserable. Nitiyah shel simcha. Planting is a planting that causes happiness. So now the Braita has to define this, right? We quoted this from a Braita. So the Braita continues. Ezu binyan shel simcha, It's building a house, a marriage house for his son. In other words, it's surrounding a happy occasion of his son getting married. It's not clear what an abavarniki of kings are. Some people say it's when the king's son is born, they plant a tree, and then they use that tree to build his throne later. So that's a very exciting, again, it's an simcha, has to do with the king's son being born. Some people say, Rashi gives two explanations. The second explanation he brings is that it was just this tree that they would use created a tremendous amount of shade so that the king could walk underneath it. And it brought happiness to the king, or it was some huge kind of tree, special kind of tree, and that's what we're talking about planting, not something more in the range of normal. Ubishe'elat shalom. You're also not to say hello to people. This is like on Tisha B'Av. You're not supposed to say to greet people. So now they say, Ein adam chashuv. No, I skipped. Tanu Rabbanan. Chaverim ein she'elat shalom benehem. When you're talking about people that are chaverim, remember there's always the chaverim versus the amei haaretz. Chaverim are the people who are the rabbis and the people who know the halacha. The amei haaretz are the people who are not so fluent in halacha. So chaverim shouldn't say hello one to the other. But amei haaretz sheshoalim, but if an am haaretz says hello to you, machzirin lehem b'safa raba rafa ubekoved rosh. They say hello to you, you can answer them back, but do it with a soft tone and your head bowed, right? Like with a seriousness, not like, hi, how are you? But hi. Because what's the issue here? We don't want people to hate you because you don't say hello to them, right? You can imagine. Someone says hello to you and you don't say hello back, it gets people very annoyed. Oh, that person's so arrogant, right? And there was in general probably some tension between the chaverim and the amei haaretz. So especially, right, the rabbis think, oh, we're better than you, we keep halacha, you don't. So they wanted to keep peace between them, and that's why you can answer them back, but you should do it very quietly and seriously. And they wrap themselves and sit like mourners, and like people who are excommunicated, like people that basically feel like God has excommunicated them. The hope is that when you sit like this, God will have pity on you. Now we're going to talk about, and this is going to take us to the end of the daf, all kinds of ways that you have to be careful not to turn to God in prayer or in mourning in certain circumstances. A very important person shouldn't bow down on his feet, like fall on his face, unless he knows he'll be answered like Yoshua ben Nun. Some people say it's because it shows arrogance. If you pray to God like that, it shows you are sure your prayers are going to be answered, and you shouldn't have that kind of arrogance. Some people say that you'll look like a fool because everyone will see you and then they'll think that God's going to answer you, and then God doesn't answer you, and then you really end up looking. It's a huge lack of respect for this important person if he does such a thing. How do we know this? After the Battle of Jericho, then Achan took the booty, which he wasn't allowed to, and then they lose the next battle. And basically, Yoshua falls on his face and prays to God, and God answers him and says, get up, because, why are you on your face? I'm going to answer you, and things are going to turn for the better. So you see that Yoshua was able to fall on his face in front of God. Most people say that we're talking in a public way. In an individual way, it seems like it's probably okay if nobody's watching you. But if you do it in public, it's more of an issue, again, either arrogance or because you might end up getting humiliated in front of people. Again, if you're a big, important scholar, then it's embarrassing for God almost if you get humiliated. But it's a reflection almost on God. He's an interesting character to choose. He wasn't really the greatest king, but he did have a redeeming incident. Okay, so the first thing we're told is you can't wear a sackcloth, okay, in mourning if you're an important person. First of all, that again, it reduces you in the eyes of people. You shouldn't be seen walking around like that, unless you know for sure you're going to get answered like Yehoram ben Achav. What was the story? There was a huge famine, and this woman comes to the king and says, listen, I'm very upset at this other woman. We had a deal. Yesterday we ate my son, and today we're supposed to eat, I don't remember if it's yesterday, today, or whatever the time frame was, but now we're supposed to eat her son, and she's not letting me. And the king is horrified by this issue of this woman being upset at the other woman because they're eating their children. And it says, when he heard what she said, Vayikrat begadav, he tore his clothes, V'hu over al hachoma, vayal ha'am v'hinei asak al b'saro, and the people see him, right? He goes by the wall where everybody can see him, and the sack is on his clothes. And his prayers get answered, and here you see that he could do it, but not everyone else is allowed to do that. And furthermore, he says, Lo kol b'kriya v'lo kol b'nefila. Some people can tear kriya, right? Can tear their clothes, rend their garments in mourning, and some people can bow their faces, but not the same. The same people can't do, like those who do that can't do that, and those who do that can't do that, or not necessarily. Moshe v'Aaron b'nefila, Yoshua v'Kalev b'kriya. Moshe and Aaron were able to fall on their faces, and Yoshua and Kalev were able to tear their clothes. They were allowed to tear their clothes, they were allowed to fall on their faces, but each one couldn't do what the other did. The fact that Yoshua eventually falls on his face, that's already when Moshe and Aaron are no longer alive. But at this stage of his life, he hasn't reached that level. How do we know this? It's all from the case of the Meraglim, the spies. Moshe v'Aaron b'nefila d'chtiv, vayipol Moshe v'Aaron al pneihem. Says they fell on their faces when the spies came back, and there was the whole fiasco. The next verse says, Yoshua v'Kalev b'kriya d'chtiv, v'Yoshua v'Kalev ben Yefuneh kav'u b'gdeihem. They both rended their garments. So there you see, one did, right? Moshe and Aaron did that. They did that. Means Moshe and Aaron, because of their position in society, were not allowed to rend their clothing. And Yoshua and Kalev weren't sure their prayers were going to be answered, so they weren't allowed to fall on their faces. Rabbi Zera, or maybe Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani asked, wait a minute, Yoshua, if it said just Yoshua the Kalev, I would have agreed with you. However, because they fell on their faces, Yoshua the Kalev and Yoshua and Kalev rendered their garments, which sounds like maybe Yoshua did both, because the Vav connects him with the previous sentence. We'll end with this last statement and we'll explain it better tomorrow. Not everyone is allowed to stand and not everyone is allowed to bow. Kings are allowed to do it with standing, and officers could do it with bowing. Okay, again, this is how they turn to God. So we'll start tomorrow with the psukim where they get the verses about the kings that they can do it b'kima, and the sarim, the officers, could do it b'hishtachavaya. With that, we'll finish today. Have a great day, everyone.